Hello, this is Cathy Cassidy, back to do some questions and answers as promised after the reading of Scarlet chapters. And while we were doing that, we did mention that maybe we could turn the YouTube channel into a kind of book club of some sort so that we could still check in from time to time. And this seems like as good a time as any to actually do that. So maybe today could be the very first episode of the Sunday Book Club with Cathy Cassidy, and maybe a lot of the posts and videos to begin with will be about my books, but they could be about all sorts of other things too, because all kinds of other things come up when you're reading a book. So it could be stuff about writing, stuff about reading. You could be telling me stuff about other books that you're reading that you're really enjoying. All kinds of everything, and just your lives, because I think over the last few months of reading chapters from Love from Lexi on the YouTube channel and then reading the chapters from Scarlet, I feel as though I've really got to know you a little bit, especially the people who regularly leave comments either on the YouTube channel or on my Facebook or email me or whatever. So I've actually missed you guys a lot over the last week since I stopped doing the Scarlet chapters. I have been busy. I had to stop really because I'm now writing again. I've got a deadline for my French publisher, so I'm working on a book for them. But maybe if we just do it once a week, we could still have a little YouTube catch up and all stay in touch, because it could be quite a nice community. So here we are, and if it's a book club, we need something to have a drink from, and I've got my coffee all sorted. So I know when we were doing the chapters from Scarlet, people were posting and saying that, you know, they like to listen with coffee, and we've already established my readers seem to be aged between 9 and 99. Lots of people were saying, oh, frothy coffee with soya milk seemed to be very popular with quite a few of you, and I was going, oh no, I think oat milk's better. And then, just to be totally awkward, don't know if you can see, I've suddenly swapped the oat milk right out and just gone back to black coffee, which is a bit weird, but anyway, it's fine. I've got my coffee and it should stay hot while we're talking. So we'll have some of your questions, because a few of you have been leaving questions on the YouTube for this. I don't know how many I'll get through today, but I have all sorts of other things planned for you. So hopefully if we space the questions out over the next few weeks, it should be enough to keep us busy. And don't forget, you can just keep adding questions onto the comments from this YouTube, and I'll work them in wherever I can in the next few episodes of Sunday Book Club. So the first question today comes from Fix It With Tea, who says, how much research do you do for different issues touched on in your books, and how do you do it? And I guess that the answer to that, it would be different for every book. If I looked at a different book, it would have different issues, different themes, different subjects, and you know, backdrops to it that might need a whole different kind of research. I remember with my very first book, Dizzy, I was trying to find out various answers to kind of astronomy sorts of questions, because there was a bit of a star theme going on in the background of the story. So I remember emailing all the way around the world trying to get the answers to the questions that I was trying to find out. But I'm going to tell you how I did the research for this book, Sammy's Silver Lining. And the reason I've kind of used this as a bit of a guinea pig, if you like, it's because it's the second book in my Lost and Found series, and anyone who listened in to the Love from Lexi story, which was the first book that I read chapters from in lockdown, this is continuing the story on. And Sammy, if you remember from Love from Lexi, is this teenage Syrian refugee boy who is a part of the band. And yeah, it was really hard. It was very important to get the research for this right, because Sammy, and there are lots of flashbacks of this in the story, has made that journey from war-torn Syria across Europe to finally get to safety in the UK. And that's a terrible and dangerous journey that a lot of people have had to make over those last few years. And if I was writing about that, which I was going to do, there was no way I could get it wrong. So I had to make sure that I knew what I was talking about and that Sammy's story was plausible. So I did an awful lot of research on the internet. I did a lot of research talking to people who worked with refugees. I talked to teachers, social workers, care and support workers for the refugee community around where I was living at the time. And I also went and visited a support centre, day centre for refugees, and I managed there to speak to several Syrian refugees. A wonderful woman who's had 2 teenage boys, who told me how hard it had been for them to settle into life in Britain, and yeah, how they didn't necessarily feel lucky for having made it to safety because of all the things that they had lost from their life that went before their life in Syria, when Syria was still at peace. So that was really interesting and definitely informed me, and even little tiny details from that, like the favourite sweets that this lovely lady's kids had enjoyed. I remember she gave me a little packet of sweets that came from Syria, and details like that went into the story. And I also spoke to the most amazing guy who had cooked a fantastic breakfast for us, because he knew that I was going there, but also for all the other refugees who were using that centre. And it was a Syrian feast, basically. So a lot of the details of the food that are in this book actually come from the food that I ate there on the day that I met this guy. He told me the most amazing story that seemed too crazy to be true. He said that when he first left Syria looking for safety and trying to get to Europe, he managed to get to Turkey and walked his way through Turkey to the coast, to the point where it's just literally about 2 or 3 miles away from the Greek island of Kos. And this was something I wanted Sammy's family to do in the story, so I was really, really interested in this. And he said, and then I swam to the island. And I'm like, hang on, you can't have swum to the island? That can't be right. But he really, really had. Even though it was such a long way, and I think swimming, 2 or 3 miles across the Aegean Sea is really massive, massive undertaking. And I think he did it at night because you weren't really supposed to be doing this. It turned out actually that this guy had been the Syrian national windsurf champion for several years running. So his story was true, and the most amazing, powerful story, really. So it was very emotional, very moving to speak to people who had been through all these things, but also it gave me the information I knew that somebody could perhaps safely survive a shipwreck, for example, in the Aegean Sea, and that became a really important, integral part of the book. So you have to do all kinds of research, and the research went on right up until the point of publication. I needed to know when borders closed, when things were possible, what rules were in force at what particular point, giving people the right to claim British nationality, all of those things. So it was quite a tricky one to actually research. So yeah, that was a great question. So thank you, Fix It With Tea. And I think I'm just going to do one more question today, because as you can see, I'm kind of waffling a wee bit with each one. This one's from Amelie, who asks how old I was when I knew I wanted to start writing books. She is 8 and would love to be an author, and she's written 3 books already, but she says they're a bit threadbare. So what can she do? And my best advice for that, Amelie, is don't worry too much about a book being threadbare when you're 8 years old, and don't worry too much about your story being a book when you're 8 years old either. So yeah, I was probably 7 or 8 when I knew I wanted to write books or write stories for a living. I just didn't know that anybody would ever allow me to do it. But luckily, somehow or other, here I am. But Yeah, I think you know from really, really early on if you have that really strong compulsion to write, and it is an amazing thing. And I would say, even, you know, in lockdown, especially, to be able to get your feelings out on paper, even if it's personal, if it's like a diary or a journal, it can be quite powerful and quite helpful, I think. So that's one thing. But also the other aspect of it is you're able to escape into a story if you happen to be writing fiction, and that can get quite addictive. And it's something that I've always had this real compulsion to do. So I don't know where that comes from, but I think some of us in this life have that compulsion to tell a story, and Amelie, I think you are probably one of them. But you're worried about your stories not being like real books, or not, you know, feeling a bit threadbare. That is normal when you're 8 years old. What my advice for you would be, don't worry about turning your story into a book. Just concentrate on writing a really good story. So you might be looking at something that is quite short. You know, you're not going to be able to compete with a great big, say, you know, J.K. Rowling book or something. That's not really viable for somebody who's 8 years old. But writing a good short story definitely is. So concentrate. You want a beginning, a middle, an end. Perhaps your end can have a really cool twist in it to surprise the reader. And my other advice would be, write from the heart. Write about the stuff that really matters to you, the stuff that you care about, something that you feel passionate about at that particular point. And that will give your stories something extra as well. They'll feel real. They'll feel you know, dramatic and strong. Whereas, you know, sometimes, for example, at school, and possibly even homeschooling, if you're, you know, in lockdown still, it's you might be given a topic to write about, and that isn't always going to be the right thing for you. And it's great to do things like that push you out of your comfort zone. But if you want to be a writer, you have to do more than just the stuff that school asks you to. So you need to write in your own time, because you really want to. And I have a feeling, Amelie, that you're doing that already. So that's brilliant. And the other thing is, don't worry if you are a little bit influenced by whatever it is you're reading at the time. A lot of my readers panic because they find themselves writing in the style of Cathy Cassidy or J.K. Rowling or whoever it is that they're reading just at that time. But you're actually learning tons while you go by writing in the style of. You're picking up how that particular author does things like plot and narrative and dialogue and all of those things, but you're learning it without any pain. It's not, you know, it's not like a textbook telling you how to do things. You're just soaking it all up from the story, and it's coming out in your story. So it's really, really good, a good way to learn. And don't panic, because your own unique individual voice will come through as well in the end. So for me, I loved doing the short stories and that, but by the time I was 11 or 12, probably about 12, I began reading a magazine called Jackie Mag, which was, my younger readers won't know anything about that, but grown-up readers who are listening along might just remember Jackie magazine. It was one of the first teen magazines, and I was reading it in the mid to late 70s, and it always had 2 or 3 short stories in every single issue, and I thought it would be the coolest thing in the world if I could actually get one of my stories published in Jackie magazine. So that became my plan over the next few years, and I borrowed my dad's old-fashioned typewriter. He used it for typing up his car repair business invoices, and it came to live in my room, and I would type up my stories, and I'd send roughly one a week away to the editor of Jackie magazine, and every single story came back with a very polite letter saying, "Dear Cathy, very sorry, story's not suitable for Jackie magazine, but if you have any others, we'd like to see them." And off I would go again and start hammering out another story. There was never any shortage of ideas. So that was a fantastic training, because I was slowly trying to teach myself how to write a short story that Jackie magazine would perhaps publish. And at the time, I never did manage to crack that magic formula and get a story into the magazine when I was a teenager. But at 16, I did get a story published by a different glossy magazine called Look Now, that doesn't exist anymore either. But that was fantastic. It was first step for me to becoming a published author. So I guess the moral is, it doesn't matter if it's a book, just get the storytelling, get the ability to write a successful, cool story, get that sorted first, and then you can make your stories more complicated, weave in more threads, and it can become a book length piece. And I don't have any of the old Jackie magazines from way back when, but I do have a couple of annuals. These were probably amongst the very first books I ever owned. It's the Jackie Annual for 76 and 77, which shows how very old and ancient I am. But they were full of amazing stuff, crazy stuff, mad fashion and romantic short stories and quizzes and all sorts of everything. And I still think they were great. They were kind of like your Bible if you were a teenage girl growing up in the 70s. So I'm going to kind of wind up now, but thank you ever so much for calling in, listening in. I do have a tiny bit more information on the launch event. I told you there could be an online launch event for my new book, Forever Phoenix, and that's definitely going to happen, I think now. It's going to happen on the 16th of July, which is the new publication date for the new book. And so you can, I'm not sure yet whether it's going to be a Zoom or whether it's going to be some kind of complicated semi-live, YouTube-y type thing, but somebody else is going to be helping me to do it, so it, hopefully they'll know what they're doing, even if my techiness is pretty rubbish. So hopefully I will see you all then. I also had a little sneak preview for you for next week. If you tune in next Sunday, I'm going to read you a special short story that comes from this little tiny book that was published, it was given away free on a magazine way back in 2007. And there is a short story in here which I thought I'd read you, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the character and the book that the big proper book that the character comes from. So that's what next week's book club will be about. So it's actually quite a rare little booklet. I think a few people managed to get copies off eBay or whatever, but I only have my copies, so it's like, next week a story which you might like. But don't forget to comment on this. Tell me any other questions that you might like answering, and I've got a couple more questions to answer next week too. I will see you then. Take care, and thanks ever so much for tuning in.